It's Wednesday, January 3rd, 2024. Let's talk about the news. From BBC News, Israel Supreme Court strikes down judicial reforms. A judicial reform that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government passed despite widespread opposition and waves of protests in the months leading up to the conflict in Gaza has been struck down by the country's Supreme Court. This reform would have limited the power of the Supreme Court, putting more of that power in the hands of the elected government instead. And critics have suggested this was an attempt by Netanyahu to reduce the judicial system's capacity to hold him accountable for corruption charges he faces, while also allowing him to anti-democratically solidify his hold on the reins of state. The protests that arose in the wake of this law's passage in July were widespread and included threats by members of Israel's military to refuse to report for service if the reforms were not scrapped. From the New York Times, South Korean opposition leader is stabbed. The head of South Korea's opposition Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, was stabbed in the neck by a man who approached him to ask for an autograph at a rally on Tuesday morning. He was taken to a hospital for treatment and was conscious and recovering from surgery as of Tuesday evening. Mr. Lee lost to his conservative opponent in the country's 2022 presidential election and has been hounded by state prosecutors ever since, accused of corruption and similar charges, which he contends are attempts by the president to intimidate his opponents in an increasingly polarized national political atmosphere. And from the Associated Press, Mexico and Venezuela restart repatriation flights amid pressure to curb soaring migration to U.S. Officials from Mexico and Venezuela announced over the weekend that they have restarted repatriation flights of Venezuelan migrants waiting in Mexico to cross the border into the United States, which is part of an agreement made between leaders at a summit in Mexico in October. These flights are picking back up at a moment in which at least 10,000 migrants a day have been arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border, and levels of legal asylum seekers applying for entrance into the U.S. and those attempting to cross into the country illegally have dramatically increased due to economic, political, and violence-related issues back in these migrants' home countries. If you're finding some value in One Sentence News, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your podcasts and/or sharing the show with a friend. You can find out more about this show or subscribe to the email version at onesentencenews.com. And you can support this and other related projects, like the Let's Know Things and Brain Lenses podcasts at understandery.com.